showing today. I'm so excited to see everyone here. So I actually just got back last week from the 56th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. So I'm going to talk about my work there and some things that I learned in specifically international frameworks of law as they relate to women's rights and women's empowerment. Alright, so the first handout you have talks about the CSW, as the UN likes to call it, this letter and service for women. So the theme this year was on empowering rural women, specifically to end hunger, which is of course why I got to go there and participate in that research work. And there are lots of reasons why this is important. But first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the CSW and how it got started and all of that. So it was actually founded in 1946. There were only 4 women at the very first charter hearing of the UN, and those 4 women pushed so hard for women's rights. And at first, they were actually just going to make it part of the Commission on Human Rights. These 4 women were like, no, we have to have our own thing. Like, we need people to hear about us and our rights. Like, it can't just be under human rights because people need certain things, right? So they fought and fought. And so at the end of 1946 is when this was actually officially established and has been in the UN since. So that's where the Commission on Status of Women comes from. It's based on a human rights framework, so that's how it focuses on women and women's rights. So the theme this year, like I said, was empowering rural women to end hunger. And there are lots of reasons for that. If you'll turn your hand out to the very back side, there's a chart with statistics, and it's the very first handout that you have. And it shows that rural women are responsible for most of the world's farming, food production, things like that, right? So if you want to look at sustainability in the future, rural women are the great place to start with that. They do, I think, 80% of the world's farming. Most of them are not paid for it. They don't have access to health care, schooling, things like this, even though they are absolutely critical to the food production of the world, to sustainability, and all these things that we absolutely have to look at in order to progress for the future, right? So this whole session of the CSW was looking at them specifically, and it was really empowering too, because the UN worked itself to bring these women to the UN. So it wasn't people from the UN talking about these women, it was these women themselves who were paid to come to the UN and share their story and say, this is how life is like where I'm from, here's how I farm, here's what I don't have, here's what you need to give me so that I can get these things. So that's how they were sort of looking at this topic, and so they were engaging the women themselves to hear what they needed to have and to find out ways to get them to them. One of the biggest things that they talked about is getting rural women on local policy-making councils and commissions, right? So even here in the U.S., rural women don't make up that much of the leadership. So that's one of the big things, is if you don't have them there shaping the table, then we don't know about what's happening, we don't know about food production systems, and all these horrible things that we're seeing happening in the world now happen, right? So that is what I spent 10 days doing, 14-hour-long days, so it was quite intense and really fun, but it was great to hear all of these amazing women come and speak and share their stories. Alright, so Alright, so there are 2 main frameworks that set up the international legal foundation to help women gain access to rights and empowerment. The first piece is CEDAW, and the second that you have, it should be red, or bright orange pink, talks about CEDAW. So CEDAW was first written in 1979, but wasn't actually ratified until 1981, and 20 countries implemented it that year, and then by 1989, about 176 countries had. So if you look at that sheet, it points out on the very first paragraph that the U.S. has not ratified CEDAW. And CEDAW is the only, who in here has heard of CEDAW before? So what CEDAW does is it comprehensively looks at women's rights, and it helps women to gain access to legal frameworks to help them empower themselves. It espouses such things as equal pay, no rape, education for women, healthcare for women, anything you can think of. It talks about it specifically through the lens of women's rights. It's the only bill internationally that looks at this, right? So on the purple handout, you have a chart, and it shows what has happened for women who live in countries that do have CEDAW. And you can see from your chart that equal pay laws have gone up in countries that have CEDAW. Women's right to property has increased in countries that have CEDAW. Healthcare access has increased in countries that have CEDAW, and all these awesome, great things have happened in countries that have CEDAW, because even though CEDAW itself is not a law, when the country signs on to CEDAW, the rest of the world can look at that and say, oh, but you're not doing this and this, what's going on, you should be looking at this more, or something like that. So, but the US is the only Western nation which has not signed CEDAW. So, I think Iran, Sudan, recently South Sudan, those countries also have not signed CEDAW. So 186 countries out of 193 have signed CEDAW, but not the US. So on the back of that same handout that has the chart, you'll see an example of how women have been able to use CEDAW to gain access to international courts and such. So if a woman is in her own country and can't be heard, she's been attacked or raped or something, and there's no law in her country, which, as you can see, several countries don't have those laws, then she can go through CEDAW and find a way to force her country to help her out, right? But the U.S. doesn't have that. It doesn't support countries who do have that. So without the U.S.'s financial backing and such, CEDAW is really hard to enforce. So one of the things that's really important is to let people know that CEDAW isn't this vague sort of thing. Like, people hear about, like, oh, well, the UN, and what are they really doing? They're just talking, and CEDAW is just this thing, but it's not this thing. It's something that really helps save women's lives. It helps women gain power in their countries. I mean, it's real. It affects women, very important. So the U.S. needs to sign on to CEDAW, and there are important reasons for that we'll talk about here in a second too. But I want to move on to another bill, which has not come up as much, and which I actually didn't even hear about until I went to the CSW. It's 1325, and it's a Security Council bill. And the Security Council has a lot more power than pretty much the rest of the UN, right? Dr. Conley, you would say that the Security Council probably is the most powerful body within the UN. I mean, they hear any conflict that happens in the world, they talk about there first. Pretty much all the power relations in the world come from this table. So the Security Council finally, in the year 2000, thought, oh, well, women are important for security. So what this bill does is it specifically looks at how women help in peace-building processes. But in order to get women into peace-building processes in the first place, they have to have access to health care, schooling, they have to be empowered. So this bill then does all of that too. It helps them get to places where they can be in the peace-building process. So it's an incredibly important bill, and the most important thing about this bill, 1325, it's not like CEDAW. Countries don't have to just sign on to it, and it's this thing that they signed on to, but it's not actually a law within their country. 1325 has to be passed within the countries. So it is a law. So if they pass it, they have to adhere to it, right? And actually, while I was there, we at the UN last or before last, there's a handout. It should be yellow. We celebrated because the U.S., even though it hasn't signed CEDAW, does have 1325. It hasn't been passed by Congress yet, but it is there. The U.S. has said we want women to be empowered enough to be in the peace-building process. We want them to be in charge of conflict resolution roles, and we want to help them get there. So the U.S. has said that it's going to help pay for schooling, healthcare, these types of things for women. So we do have that, and that is enforceable because, like I said, it is a law within the country, right? Alright, so we're going to go to the next slide. Alright, so despite all of these great laws that we have, or treaties and such, clearly there's a lot of work to be done. Out of all the people who are consistently hungry in the world, women comprise 60% of those people. Keeping in mind that women farm more than anyone else too, right? So they're the farmers, but they're also the most hungry too. So 60% of the world's population is consistently hungry is women. So inter-partner violence is still a big issue. So Japan has the lowest rate at 15%, which is actually very low. And then Peru and Ethiopia have the highest at 71% of women. So this is still obviously a problem. And so 16% of the world's population cannot read or write. 2/3 of those are, of course, women. And so despite these bills and laws, there's still a lot of work to be done. And this is why these have to be talked about. This is why people have to know that they are out there, that there is a framework which women can look to help them. And the important thing about this is that we're not trying to tell women what they need. We're trying to let women see what they have so that they themselves can get what they know they need. Because women know, what their lived experience is more than we can tell them. You know how you live your life and you know what you need. And so the importance is to make sure women know that these frameworks are there, so they know how to get to them, so that they know how to use them, so that these sorts of things can improve. Importantly though, we want to bring this up. Because this isn't something that's out there in the world, it's here too. So the U.S. has a food insecurity rate of about 15%. Tennessee's is a little bit higher, it's about 17%. The East Side of Tennessee is the highest, right? And so most of the people who are food insecure are single mothers. 35.1% of those who are consistently hungry are women with children. And that's a lot of people here in the U.S., right? So this isn't something like, let's help poor people somewhere else in the world. That's not how it works. It's all of us that are facing the same issues. 1 in 4 will be attacked by their partner here in the U.S. The majority of people here can read and write, but the caveat to that is 2.6 million rural children cannot read. And 23% of people who live in rural places can only read on 2nd or 3rd grade reading level. Right? So there's still a lot of work to be done, specifically here in East Tennessee and in places like this area. So it's important to look at this. And then on top of that, we have to next one. Recently, I'm sure you all have seen and heard the insane laws and bills that are being passed just left and right here in the U.S. Completely bent on trying to control women's rights and access to healthcare. I mean, we can name 20 or 30 bills that have just been heard probably this month about this issue. So that's one of the things that we have to consider. So the U.S. has assigned CEDAW. So then things like this can happen, and the rest of the world can't say anything, right? Because there's no framework to be like, all right, U.S., come on, get this all together and fix your stuff. Because there's not a framework, we haven't signed it. It's not part of our system. And so then women who are affected by these things then can't go outside the country to work with them because they can't sign CEDAW, right? So it's really important to realize that these international frameworks are not really these vague things floating out in space, but they're very important, and they're very important to us here, right now. Not sort of like, well, we'll help the poor people here and here, but no, this is about us, what's happening now. So strategies for change. So one of the things that we talked about is that rural women, there's not very many of them in places of power, or the places that the economic or political system would see as power, right? So women have to use strategies instead. For instance, I met a woman, Margaret Williams, who was the first woman parliamentarian out of Namibia, and they were hearing a law about rape. So there was no law on rape, and she was the only female in all of Parliament. And so the men kept saying, well, it's how the women dress, how they look, how they dress. So she was like, well, no one's going to listen to the women because I'm the only one here. So she comes to Congress wearing a see-through robe. And she waits her turn silently. And they get to her, and she stands up and steps out in her completely see-through robe. And she says, you don't want to pass this bill. And I challenge you, rape me. Look at me. I'm obviously asking for it. And so she does this in Congress. And all of the men stop. And they're just horrified, like, oh my goodness, what is this woman doing? Like, we're not going to rape you, that's crazy. She's like, oh, so you have the choice of whether you're going to rape me or not. And so then they passed the bill, because it took that, right? So we have to think in those ways, like, what can we do with the few voices that we do have to have them heard? So I'm going to go ahead and start the conversation. So obviously, we talked about how important international frameworks of law are for women. But I would like to hear what some of you think, some of these thoughts that you have to add to that, like why they're important, or other ways that we can look at things too.
What's the question exactly?
Ways in which you think that international frameworks of law are important or not for women.
But what's the reasoning that you have seen for the U.S. not signing off on CEDAW? Yeah, sometimes in the U.S. the rationale is, well, that we don't want to give international organizations priority, over national laws, federal laws, because that detracts from the power of the U.S. to control, its own destiny, so to speak. So, what are the kinds of reasons that you have heard about why the U.S. hasn't signed off on CEDAW?
It has one of the big ones. And of course, to the U.S., if it signs off, then it has to attempt to adhere to it, and that would mean passing the ERA, for instance, right? So the Unequal Rights Amendment. We would have to pass that, and it would have to be from the Constitution, so that's something that CEDAW says. We would have to be constitutionally guaranteed rights.
Well, we could always say 14th Amendment. I don't know if you need to pass an ERA, so you could always fall back on the 14th Amendment. But those sound like similar kinds of reasonings. Well, we don't want to, give power away.
Yeah, things like that. And then too, I think on the back of that red sheet, there's a list of things, myths and facts. But too, the current climate on family planning and access to health care, that has been a huge one. The U.S. does not want to touch that. It's in CEDAW, and they're horrified of what that may mean, and what they may have to do to prevent these laws that are being heard in the U.S. now, and things like that. And that's a really big one, is access to health care for women. And so the basic human rights aspect of it, I think, is what the U.S. doesn't really like so much, because we would have to change a whole lot of things and enforce things too. Healthcare as a right, for instance. That's just things.
Well, the larger context is just another case of American exceptionalism. We don't think that we need to be watched. We're always good. The laws are for the bad kids.
Exactly. So then I wanted to ask, if the U.S. did sign on to CEDAW, what would that mean? And I would like everyone to think about that in two different contexts. So what would it mean for people inside of the U.S. and what would it mean for people outside of the U.S.?
follow up on what Teresa was saying, we would be recognizing our own accountability and making a public statement that we are accountable and that there are flaws in our system that we need to address. We would be, waving our flag that we need to address those things.
So these are ideas that I have of ways that we specifically can get involved in these issues. And of course, the first thing is to teach people. People don't know that these things are there. They don't hear these words. They don't see these sorts of things, and they don't know. And even when they do hear them, they're like, oh, that's just this big, unimportant thing somewhere else in the world. But people really need to know how important it is and how it actually affects them. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't get and don't hear. And so we have to think of ways to reach people, especially here in this region, in this area where people are poor, don't have access to healthcare, schooling, hunger rates are high. So people here especially need to hear these things. They especially need to know. And of course, contacting representatives is always useful in that they know that you know, right? I of course would not say this is the most important thing to do. I say something that needs to be
Or
done.
hopeless depending on who you're representing.
Right, so
One way to umbrellas.
Phil Rowe, I'm not sure how many times you can call him to ask for help, but it is something that needs to be done. They need to know that we are watching them, and there's a lot of us, and they need to hear that people here do know what's going on with the rest of the world with women's rights. Civil society is really helpful in these two things. I work with the Women's International for Peace and Freedom of the CSW, and they are working constantly all over the world to make sure that people do hear these things and know about them. They will contact your reps for you, and they have things sometimes, resources, all sorts of things that people here may not have. So anything that you are specifically interested in, I'm sure you can find a civil society. And two, civil society has a place at the table at the CSW and at the UN. Even though they're not often heard specifically within the UN sees them, is actually in contact with them, right? So if you work with them and share your concerns, they can get that to people that you may not be able to get to. And of course, they have funding and resources too, which is really important for people that live here in this area. Another thing that let's talk about a lot at the CSW. Lima Bowie, does anyone here know who that is? Yeah. She won the Nobel Peace Prize this year. She's featured in the documentary Pray Double Back to Hell for her work in saving. So one of the things that she said is we don't want to sit at the table, we want to shape the table. Because we've been sitting at the table for a very long time. Women have been there. But they haven't been able to actually shape the table. They haven't been able to shape what's being talked about, what's being said about women, what's being said about human rights. So it's important that students, faculty, anyone you come in contact with is encouraged to share their voice and to be confident enough to be like, no, I don't think this is how we should be talking about this. So that starts here. This is a college, and this is where people learn that they actually are important and capable and can do things and can get out and talk to the UN. I mean, I did not think that I would ever go to the UN and shake hands with some of these people. It was horrifying. But at the same time, having that experience has really helped me to see like, oh, this is just a thing that people can do if they know that they can do it. And that's important is I'm teaching women students, especially that they should be talking, that they should be sharing their thoughts, that they should be telling their lived life, like they need to be out there. And afraid is okay, but you still need to be doing it. And I think a lot of times when they're silenced, they're afraid to speak. When they do speak, it's just sort of like, oh, whatever, that's just who you're like. And that does happen here a lot. That still, even now, is something that we see in classrooms that we hear happen. And so it's important to stop that and be like, no, let's hear what this person has to say. No, Absolutely. So I think one of the biggest things we can do is get women to the table so that they can even shape it. And then all of us too, of course. Men, women, and children shape the table. And that's something important to think about. Student groups and activities. I know Shane is from Model UN, right? So we do have students here that are doing amazing work. Just majority leadership alliances on campus, and the LCRC does a lot of really great work in human rights and women's rights. So there are people and places that are here on campus that do this work. So finding them and tapping into that, I think, is incredibly important because they are here and they need to be seen far more than they are now. And something that Women's Studies, of course, does is we teach this in the coursework that we offer. And I think it would be great to see more and more of that coursework offered. It's especially important if we seriously want to consider human rights a sustainable future. These things are absolutely critical. It's not a side course. It's not something that's just like, oh, I'm going to take this really cool course because it sounds fun. It's absolutely essential for human rights in the future. I mean, that just is how it is. Encouraging students to get involved in things, forcing them out of the classroom, forcing them to work with other people, forcing them to share their stories and hear stories. That's really important. I know in the majority of our women's studies courses, students do some sort of project where they work with people on campus or here in the community, and I mean that has really shaped the work that I've done. That's why I went on to do what the things I've done is because of that. When you start to work with people and hear their stories, you start realizing that, oh, this isn't this one thing that just affects me or this one person I know. This is shaping how a lot of people live, and so there's something more to this. So how can I go on and find out what else is happening, what's making this certain kind of like hunger, for instance. That's what I do, and that started here when I did a project in my junior year of undergrad with Second Harvest. I think I was in Women a Global Perspective, possibly, and we had to go do something, and that's what I did. And seeing that, I was like, so hunger is this really big thing that affects a lot of people, and so why are people hungry? Where does this come from? Don't we have enough food? What's happening? So that's extremely important. And then, of course, one of the most important things that we can do is remember to pull people up as we climb. So you can't just shake the table on your own and then you just be done with it. You have to bring people with you. You have to teach the people behind you. You have to be sure that they know what you knew. Because if you're gone, then it's all gone. And especially here, where people come here and then want to leave. Because who wants to stay in East Tennessee? It's how people feel. So people come here and they leave and don't pass on what they've learned, what they've done, all these amazing things that people here have been doing for a very long time. Those are sort of lost and filtered out and not heard of again. So then people here don't feel like they've ever done anything because they don't see it, they don't hear about it, because people aren't coming back and saying, look, you can do this too. And I know it because I did it, and I've been here too. So that's one of the most important things, is to not forget that it's not just us, it's not just me or I, it has to be all of us, and we have to work together. And one of the big things that we talk about a lot is there's this sort of atmosphere of competition with women. I'm sure some of you may have noticed that, possibly, where women like to sort of look at each other and be like, oh, look at her, she's not this, or oh, I'm so much better, and that's one of the things that hurts women. Like, even if someone, is wearing a funny dress, it's okay. So to get past that sort of cattiness, I don't really like that term, but I mean, it's something that does happen, and we have to see that. And sure, we can say things, but it's important to know that we're all in this together, right? So we all have to fight, and even if you leave this people behind, where are you really going to go? Human rights are just not going to happen. So those are my thoughts, and I want to go ahead and open it up to see what other things people are doing. I want people here to share the great work that they've done and other ideas for how ETSU can get students in East Tennessee, in the U.S., to become more involved in international frameworks to help empower women, especially rural women, who work so hard to bring us food and sustainability and everything else that we just don't see on a daily basis. So, share your great work.
Well, you've done some work, and you know some others who have worked on some projects in this area. And, you know, really, I wouldn't diminish, this is my own thought, I wouldn't diminish East Tennessee as a place to live. Now, it's, a lot of us have been here a number of years and we're not from East Tennessee, so it's a good area to live, I think. That aside, I know you have worked with some local food organizations, have you? So let me say some things about what you've done or what you know what some others have done. Stephanie has worked and talked to me about what she's done.
Sure. So starting last spring, as part of my thesis project, I started working with women who live here, and specifically women who work with food or farming or sustainability in food. And some of the first women I worked with were Sam Jones of the Carver Rec Center. She established the Carver Peace Garden a few years ago. She does amazing work there. People who live in the area come and have small plots, but it helps them. And then she also helps teach people how to can and things like that. So cultural things that help people to preserve food, which helps people when you eat. And in Chattanooga, there's a really big food co-op called the Scenic City Food Co-op, and it is huge. And they actually are able now to bring the food from the farmer straight to people who want to purchase it. So that's been really great. And then Sally Causey of Rural Resources in Greene County is amazing, and I suggest everyone go home and check that out. They do tons of work. They in all of the low-income housing sections of the county, they build small farm and garden plots and taught people how to farm for small portions of food and how they can. They have a summer program that runs from kindergarten to high school that teaches kids how to grow their own food. When they get to high school, they can even learn how to start their own farm, catering business, things like that. So it's very hands-on skills training for these young people. And they have a farmers market like the one that Scenic City started, where they go in the mornings and pick up the produce from the farmers and they take it places, but you don't necessarily have to pay for it in cash. You can work for your food too. So they have done amazing work. Stephanie, who's also in the same program as me, Stephanie Langley, I'm not sure, I think most of you probably know her, has done a lot of work with environmental issues here in Appalachia. She's been in West Virginia. She helped organize the March on Blair Mountain. That was this past summer, the summer before last. So to get people to look at issues of coal and what that means for Appalachia, how it actually impoverishes people, and things like that. So there are people who are doing lots of great work all the time too. So in my nonprofit, actually, we just were founded in the fall. It's Build It Up East Tennessee, and if anyone wants to come and intern with us this summer, we do have paid internships. You can see more about that. It's not paid a lot, but some money. And we're doing skills training, farming. We're actually working with farmers here in the area, workshops on food and issues of hunger and things like that. So it's going to be a really great summer.
What's it called?
Build It Up East Tennessee. Build It Up. And we're on Facebook. Search us.
I guess I was just going to say a few words about the World Model United Nations, which I got back from us last week. So a lot of what you're talking about is really interesting because the World Model United Nations is like if you're not familiar with the program, it's in a lot of high schools and colleges as well. And we've just established it this last semester here for the first time on ETSU's campus. And it's a simulation of what people do at the UN and their specific committees. So I got really lucky this year being on the World Conference on Women. And it really got my interest. Dr. Crumley actually brought it up to me, the whole program and the convention and the conference. So it's cool because in the US, when they do Model United Nations, it is people coming mostly domestically. So it's people from the US representing certain countries, trying to come from a perspective of different nations. But everyone that's actually speaking in discussion are US citizens usually. And so the World Model United Nations was created with the intention of hearing global perspectives. So the people in my committee were actually from different nations all over the world. And it was really cool because we were talking about the status of the girl child and representation of women in parliament. And so it was really eye-opening to hear people discuss from their own nation's perspective. And it was also what you're saying here about we want to shape the table. In our committee, we had probably 5 men and like 20 women. And the issue was, even our chair brought up, why are the men continually coming up here more than the women? And so it's interesting that you're right, like the women were there, but so many of them were silent. And so that was an interesting thing to see, that it continually was being led primarily by the men. And the other thing that I was going to ask you along those lines is when we were kind of discussing, because in committee what you do is try to develop a resolution, and then what you would want to implement if you were in positions that you could implement programs or changes. And a lot of what I was hearing, because I was trying to listen to how people discuss what they think would create positive change when they don't come from the experience of the people that they're talking about. And it was really bothering me because I kept hearing, well, they just don't know, or if they only could do this, or if we only told them this or taught them this, then they would be able to do this. And it was bothering me so much because these were people all in university setting, in higher education, from very specific backgrounds, economically for the most part, because a lot of them had paid or had families pay for them to go to the conference. And so it was hard for me to feel comfortable in the discussion, because I really, what you're saying about having people, having the voices at the table that represent different situations and different experiences and things like that. And so I was wondering, when you went to your visit, I don't know what all you got to do, but if you noticed or heard of people bringing in, you're talking about rural women, so I don't know if there's people from rural community being brought in, or if that's a push in the UN to have more voices heard from different experiences, because that's also been a big kind of a negative argument against the UN a lot of times is, and Lema Gabawi, I read in her book, if you all haven't read it, it's really cool, Mighty Be Our Powers, and she talks about how the UN came in and basically said, okay, we see what's going on with this conflict here in a certain situation, and this is what we're going to do. And she talks about how she went to them and said, wait, you haven't heard our voices, you haven't asked the community's opinion, how do you know how this will affect our community? How do you know that it will be a positive change? And she said that she was turned away repetitively, and so they went ahead and implemented what they wanted, and it created a big problem with they're trying to disarm and take away weapons, and it created a bigger issue following that because their voices weren't heard in the community. It wasn't community motivated as a joint movement, and so that's what I was wondering. That was my big concern. I was wondering what your perspective, or if you learned anything on that while you were at your conference.
I mean, yeah, and so that was one of the huge things, because the UN continues to be very top down. So they did intentionally work on that. They paid for, I can't remember remember the exact number, several hundred women to come to the UN to talk and share their stories. So that was a really great thing to see that they had worked so hard to do that. But at the same time, one of the things we talked about was how civil society was, they're the ones who actually went in and picked the women, right? So the women had to be found and then they were chosen. So even then, it was still like, who did you pick? Where are these women actually coming from? But then to still that they were there was still incredibly hopeful. And but yeah, there still was a very imperialistic feel sometimes, and a lot of the time, a woman would choose to speak in her indigenous tongue, right? And no one would be there to help her to translate. And so that when you have to translate yourself sometimes, that sort of silences your place. And that was the big thing too. So we and then even when people would speak in their own tongues, other people from the U.S. would just sort of not. They're like, well, I'm not going to try it because this is too hard. This takes too much time, and they would just walk out of the session. And so people didn't want to hear that. They didn't want to hear, anything that sounded not what they understood. So that was a huge issue. But the UN, at least for this, was obviously trying to work on that. But things like what you're saying are incredibly important. I think like people need to hear that. People need to see that we always can do more work to get women there and to get them heard, because like you're saying, like you can't have someone else speak for someone who hasn't even lived in the region, doesn't actually know what it's like, may have been there for 2 or 3 years even, like you still don't, that's not where you're from or how you live, so how can you speak for that person? So that is something that really does need to be looked at and worked on, is getting them there and helping them to speak for themselves and getting people to actually listen too. So there's that whole atmosphere of like imperialistic sort of thinking is still there, and that really needs to be worked on, for sure.
I've got a question. You received this whenever that you went to your UN conference? And I'm just looking for an insight here, like if there was discussion that went on after the fact. Let's just say for the sake of argument that the presidential administration changes with the next. You can write all of these action plans that you want to. An administration that comes in and opposes or doesn't care, not so much opposes, but doesn't care. Did you all discuss, like, if the administration changes, what happens to this? Because it's going to go down the tubes.
I mean, for sure. And that's one of the things we tried to discuss, but it was really hard to get that through because no one wants. The thing about a lot of top level officials is that this is just to make them look good, right? And so, Will, who I was with, really hammered them on that. And we actually presented to them a 64-page list of things we thought they should do to make this more enforceable, I guess. And I have that if you want to see it. I mean, it's pretty intense. Like, well, these things need to actually be passed through the Congress. This needs to be in the Constitution. Like, these are things that people need to be doing. Like, you can't just stand up here and say this. So that was one of the, I think the best things about being there was to hear the women call them out. Like, well, what do you actually mean? What do you, like, tell me things you have done. I don't want to hear these words anymore. I want to know what you have done. And so that was really good, was to see that. So.
Okay, so there was.
Yeah.